Right. Let's get started, shall we? So, evening, everyone, and welcome to the third Networkish webinar. As normality is getting seemingly closer, hopefully this will be the last event we have to run during a lockdown. Fingers crossed that that's it with the COVID waves now, and we can live our lives regularly again. I'm Bradley Ferguson, a town planner for the Bristol team at Tetra Tech Planning, and I'll be hosting webinar 3 again with my colleagues Emily, John, and Julie. It's great to see some familiar names in attendance. For those who are joining us for the first time and aren't aware, Networkish is a webinar series designed to help professionals within the early stages of their career to come together and get a chance to understand more about the roles and experiences of others within the property and development industry. I'm not quite sure where the time's gone since our last event. Eat, sleep, work, stay inside and repeat doesn't exactly give our brains much to remember over the past weeks. Most of my free time has been spent on Netflix watching Lupin and rewatching Suits, which I definitely recommend. To be honest, I'm just looking forward to the Easter break and what's forecasted to be some good weather over the next few days. Anyway, I'm sure the last thing you want to do is hear me rambling on. So let's hear from the other guys. John, how are things with you? Anything exciting occurred since the last event? And what series are you watching at the moment to keep you sane?
Hi guys, good to see you all. For those that don't know me, I'm John Shakespeare. I'm a senior planner here at Tetra Tech in the Bristol office. Exciting things that have gone on since the last sort of session. Quite excitingly, we had an offer accepted on a house. So me and my girlfriend are looking to move in hopefully soon. Hopefully we can get in before the various stamp duty deadlines, etc. So that's all good. We've sort of been binge watching a lot of stuff actually, as I'm pretty sure everyone has. We have just started Your Honour on Now TV with Bryan Cranston, so really enjoying that. So hopefully it continues in the same vein. Julie, how about you? What have you been up to and what have you been binging on?
Hello, hi, I'm Julie O'Rourke. I'm a senior planner in Tetra Tech in the Bristol office. I've, well, very similar to Bradley, it's been a lot of eating, drinking, sleeping, watching Netflix and binging TV. I think that's been my last year, really. At the moment, watching Banshee, trying not to binge it too much, but we've gone through about 8 episodes in a few days. So highly recommend it, but definitely only watch it with a significant other. It's a bit raunchy in places. So, so definitely recommend that. It's good fun. How about you, Emily?
Thanks, Jules. Hi everyone, I'm Emily Porter. I'm a town planner in the Tetra Tech planning team in Bristol. As with most of us, I've not been up to much recently, but as the weather's got warmer, I've been growing some plants in the garden, which has been keeping me busy. In terms of telly, my favourite programme recently has been Bridgerton, I have to say. I know it's the same for a lot of people. For those who haven't watched it yet, I won't give too much away, but wow, the last episode is a real shock. Well, it was to me anyway. So back to you, Brad.
That's good stuff. I must say I did like Bridgerton myself, especially the last episode. So yeah, take Emily upon her recommendation there, guys. But thanks. Now we've got another 3 speakers today on our webinar, and who've kindly agreed to provide some insight into their day-to-day roles and tell us a bit about themselves. We have Annabel, who's a senior planner at Storey Homes, one of our own, Grainee, who's a structural engineer here at Tetra Tech, and Jack, who's a planner from Atkins. So if I could ask you all to make sure your microphones are on mute and your cameras are turned off for the first part of the webinar, that would be great. And don't worry, there will be some time for you to show your faces during the question and answer section later. If you do lose any connection during the presentations, please try our webinar link again. And if this still doesn't work, just give us an email and we'll let you back in. Also, if any of our guest speakers do lose connection, please bear with us. It's the joys of working from home. So first up, we have Annabel from Storey Homes. Over to you.
Hello, and thanks for that introduction, everyone. That's great. It's nice to be part of the Tetra Tech sort of world. As some of you will know, I am formerly of WIG, which became Tetra Tech. So it's nice to be back in the fold again. But since then, in January 2020, I joined Storey Homes, which is a SME house builder based in Milton Keynes. I am their one and only planner, and I am a chartered town planner now as of last year. I've got 5 years experience, with 2 of those being during my planning masters, which I did at Oxford Brookes University part-time. And the main roles which I take on sort of outside of my day-to-day role are as Thames Valley Young Planners Chair, which covers Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Bedfordshire, I think, no, Oxfordshire. There you go. Sorry, I should know that as the chair. And I'm also a regional activities committee member for the South East region, as well as being a Women in Planning committee member. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you a bit about Storey Homes. So as I mentioned, it's an SME house builder, so small to medium enterprise. So we're a family-run business. It's owned by the 2 Storey brothers, Matt and Mark, who actually have quite humble beginnings, working on their father's market stall, and actually running a very successful food business as their main enterprise. But back in 2003, they ventured into the house building world. And since then have grown exponentially, took on a managing director in 2015, and now have a full board of directors who they're all actually ex-PLC, so have got that sort of wealth of large-scale planning and house building knowledge, but bring that to now a small developer. So we deal with both immediate opportunities and also strategic, so both sides of planning for me. And we're currently building about 50 homes per year, but that's set to grow. And we work really across the Oxford to Cambridge arc and all in between, which encompasses a nice 35 local planning authorities, which I monitor all the planning policy and housing supply for. So that's a task in itself, which is quite fun. But yeah, one of the main features about us, which is quite exciting as a planner for me, is working on the urban design and the actual architectural style, because we don't have standard house types. It's quite fun being able to do bespoke designs. So if we go on to the next slide, Julie. So yes, so I got here, as I say, by doing a master's in spatial planning. Before that, I did a human geography degree. I had over 3 years with WIG, who are now Tetra Tech, based at their Milton Keynes team, where I got to know the very friendly faces of Networkish. When I joined Storey Homes, it was a new foray for them. They hadn't had an in-house planner before, and wanted to bring that expertise internally rather than going out to consultants all the time. Sorry, guys. But what they've sort of aimed to do really is to have someone there to support the company through the whole lifespan of a site. So working with all the different teams, which is really what attracted me there after having consultancy experience, was to learn about, the technical and construction side of things, which I wasn't really aware of, particularly in a consultancy role, as you're just not exposed to it as frequently. So part of my role as well is representing the company sort of nationally and locally, writing representations. But if we go to the next slide, I can tell you a bit more about my day-to-day. So being the only planner, I sort of cover both sides of the immediate sites that we currently have, making sure that they get their reserve matters permissions, discharge conditions, all of the typical types of planning roles and duties that you'd expect. But also right from the site identification, a site that comes in, looking at basically with this 2-strand approach. If it's got a permission or is allocated, fantastic. Some of my work's done for me, perfect. Usually by consultants, which is really helpful. And then for me, really, it's then getting into the nitty gritty. How does this work for the business? How does this achieve good planning? Is there certain things that we might want to vary? and how can we really create a design which is desirable and saleable at the end of the day as well. But actually the sort of more planning side of things, in a way, in terms of being influential from the early stage, is Storey strategic. So taking on sites of anywhere between a capacity of 20 units to 1,000, and looking really at how to take that from either having no planning credentials, no permission at all, or negative credentials, and setting out a course really for how we'll look to engage through policy with local authorities and parish councils, and secure ultimately either an allocation or an outline permission, or ideally both would be lovely, and kind of setting that course, some of them being as short terms of 3 to 5 years and some being more like 10 to 15 years. So quite varied in that respect, and really just my typical day is kind of split down the middle, I'd say, of these two roles, looking at immediate sites and strategic. And my key skills I kind of have to use for that is exercising my own planning judgment. I think there can be quite a bit of pressure to come up with an answer that's not sitting on the fence, and it's quite easy to sit on the fence as a planner because there's normally a balance. There's reasons why you would do something, reasons why you wouldn't, but I think being in a role where I'm the only planner, I have to refine my view and make sure I'm giving what I feel is sound advice to the business. So if we just move on to the next slide, I've got a few examples of work I've done in my career. So the first one's actually a bit of a throwback to my time at WIG, and just explaining really some of the non-house builder or development type of work I've done. So this was a housing multiple occupation study. So it's a background study to inform policy making for Bedford Borough Council. So I worked on this with Laura Robinson, who I think is here today, helped me with it, and also Eleanor Gingell as part of Milton Keynes team at the time. And effectively, we looked at the impacts of houses and multiple occupation on the way that Bedford was developing and changing, social impacts, health impacts, transport impacts, etc. And brought that together to see, actually, is the permitted development right to change a family home to a house and multiple occupation being used possibly too much? Is the growth of that causing potential bad planning or bad planning effects that need to be then checked in some way? So restricting that permitted development right. So really my role in this was a lot of research, a lot of GIS mapping, and a lot of public consultation, focus groups, site visits on a very rainy day, as is always the way with planning, the bad luck, and really actually again kind of coming to that planning judgment, and why an Article 4 direction might actually be the right thing to do, which was in the end what we resolved. And in the end I ended up writing the conclusions for this, having been informed by all of the team and sort of drawing it together. So that was quite a key skill, was sort of taking the resources from all the rest of the team, and bringing that into, you know, an easy, understandable document that could be digested by the mayor and other political people within the Bedford Borough Council. So moving on to something in my new day-to-day. So this is Storey Homes' current development. We broke ground in December 2020 on our site in Houghton Regis, which is close to Junction 11 of the M1. It's a 109 unit scheme within a sustainable urban extension. So when I came into the business, this was about to go through its reserve matters with a planning consultant. So I liaised with them to get it really to a point where the conditions would be something we could, I could then subsequently discharge. So I've been looking really at the outline, which was done by a consortium, and the reserve matters to discharge all those conditions. So whilst that doesn't sound the most fun as a role, it actually has been quite good, because part of it has been doing a public art strategy, which I have found is another string to my bow, another skill to interpret, and something I've quite enjoyed producing. and thinking really about how different pieces of public art can enhance the public realm and the site itself, and be achieving good placemaking. So that's one of the highlights really that I wanted to share, and a current development that's of quite a large scale for this company, but definitely a scale we want to be continuing to develop at. So if we move on to a sort of more strategic piece that I'm working on. So for those that are local to Milton Keynes, and I think there's a few who've joined who are, they may know of the Wavendon Properties Limited appeal that was ongoing for many years, went to High Court, went back to inquiry. It was quite a significant deal at the time, that was for 203 units at a site in Woburn Sands or Wavendon. So since that, unfortunately, was dismissed, or I say unfortunately for our company anyway, in January we had of 2020, we had the second inquiry, and in June 2020, that's when it was dismissed. Since then, I've been rethinking about the strategic land for it's 44 hectares in total, so a capacity of more like 670 plus, up to potentially 1,000 units, dependent on the configuration, and starting to sort of rebuild relationships with different stakeholders. So this is kind of a lot of my day to day is working with Milton Keynes Council, the MK Futures team, nearby landowners and consortiums to try and figure out that actually in the more strategic term, as local plan making progresses, how can we be engaged in that positively, and how can we potentially come up with some designs in the future that will achieve the aspirational goals of the National Model Design Code and other things such as net zero. So if we just go to the next slide. That's really what I wanted to touch on as my industry spotlight. I think Grainee will hopefully talk about net zero a little herself and embodied carbon, but that's definitely something that for house builders is top of our agenda of what we're looking into. How are we going to become net zero? Not only the homes themselves, but the wider developments that we do, and really that against the backdrop of a changing planning situation. As I know many of you will be aware of the planning white paper and its lofty ambitions, many of you may also be aware that it's causing delays for lots of local plans, and that's a challenge really when you're looking to the future for net zero, and trying to be this strategic planner that I have to take on that role. Well, actually, when you're looking at the future and potential overhaul of the planning system, which is delaying the current planning system, how do you fit within that? And really, how can I create a planning strategy which is relatively reliable? Because, you know, I don't want to be looking into a crystal ball and trying to advise the business owners on something which is so likely to fluctuate. So how do I pare that down? And really also for our region, the cancellation of the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway, major infrastructure, also announced very recently, although potentially expected for some time, again sort of shifts the focus as to what next, and where are we going to focus much more on East West Rail, and how that is developing in coming years, and really will there be something which supersedes the Oxford to Cambridge Expressway? So a bit of food for thought for local folk there, local to me anyway, and also some thoughts about the direction of house building in the future. So hopefully that has been quite useful. And if Julie just flicks the last slide, that is my contact details and my LinkedIn, for any of you who aren't already connected with me. Please feel free to reach out and connect. And yeah, I look forward to answering any questions at the end of the presentations.
Fab. Well, thank you so much, Annabel. That was a really interesting presentation. It was great. Really good to hear about some of the key projects you've worked on and some of the different tasks you undertake for Storey Homes as the only planner, which I think is crazy and an incredible job role to take. If anyone has any questions for Annabel, please write them in the chat and we'll pick them up in the question and answer session at the end. So whilst we're with you, Annabel, it's time for the question of the webinar. So we're looking to know, what has been your favourite lockdown TV series so far?
So I've had a few that have evolved over the different lockdowns that we've had. I'd say harking back to old TV, I've enjoyed Hell's Kitchen on Amazon Prime, watching what seems now like poor TV quality of 2006, although I'm sure it was very good at the time. And also Downton Abbey, I've gotten into, I'd say, over the last year, and really enjoyed. And most recently, and like Julie, I've probably watched this far too quickly already. I've been watching The Bold Type on Netflix, which is very empowering for women and based on the Cosmopolitan editor-in-chief, I believe, and how she sort of rose through the ranks and her experiences and careers. So quite not planning based at all, but quite light-hearted and funny, as well as pretty empowering. So I'm already halfway through series 2, and I think I watched it first a few days ago. So, so that's an endorsement.
Plenty to keep people busy if they're looking for any telly. I have to say, Hell's Kitchen is perfect for lunchtime watching. It's just short enough to get one in your lunch break. Well, thank you so much, Annabel. So we'll now pass on to Grainee, who's going to tell us a bit about her role as a graduate structural engineer at Tetra Tech. So over to you, Grainee.
Hi, thank you. Hi, I'm Grainee. Lots of you will know me from working in Tetra Tech. I'm a graduate structural engineer, and I've been here since September 2019, so around a year and a half now. And I'm based in Bristol, which is currently my bedroom office, as you can see behind me. So Tetra Tech, if you just move to the next slide, please. Thanks. Lots of you will know, or should know, we're a leading provider of consulting and engineering services. And those services are quite varied. So the civil and structural sector that I'm in, but we also provide services in environment planning, like these lovely hosts, transportation and other services as well as that, and in different sectors as well, so public and private, in sectors like defence and nuclear. So there's a lot of different work going on. We were formerly WIG. As of January 2021, we've become Tetra Tech, which means our workforce is now 20,000 worldwide, and 2,000 of those being in the UK. So now how I fit into Tetra Tech. Like I said, I'm a graduate engineer, so I started in September 2019 after graduating the prior June from Glasgow University. I did an integrated master's there, so it was 5 years. And in your final year, you do 6 months of that doing a long project. But that wasn't the only project. It was a very project-orientated degree, which is why it suited me down to a T. And you got to be more specific with your courses the later on you were in your degree, which meant that I got to focus in on courses I actually enjoyed, which kind of gave me a focus of knew what I wanted to do. So at Tetra Tech, I do a various of roles depending on what project we're working on, or different projects. There's a constant array of projects happening. So some of my tasks are calculations and modelling, preparing drawings, and hopefully in the future some site visits. I've only gone on a few, but everything's obviously come to a bit of a halt. But I would say there's not really a typical day. I have a typical day for maybe a few weeks at a time while working on a certain project, but in reality, I can be doing something completely one day to the next. And in terms of skills, I think that engineers have, I think it's quite common in our industry that teamwork and communication are key. You have to just be able to talk to people and get information and understand what other people are doing, which is why this is a great webinar. But everyone always says that engineers are these like dorky mathematicians, which I suppose is a bit true. But I think that mathematical side is more about problem solving and wanting to learn, actually, I think is one of the most important traits of an engineer, because I think that you never stop learning, and that's what I've really enjoyed about my career so far. So I'm going to talk a bit about what I do on a day-to-day rather than doing a case. So one of the main things that I've been doing since I've joined is designing and modelling. So lots of people will know about like the early stages of design. When putting in for planning permission or whatever, career you're in, there's always going to be this like design team discussion. What's the structure actually going to be? What's the building? Is it going to be made out of concrete, or is it going to be made out of steel, the floors? And that's like a design team discussion that happens with structural engineers, with civil engineers, with architects. So it's and the client obviously as well, as I say. And so then once that gets kind of passed down and approved, and there's kind of a rough idea of where we're going, or more than a rough idea, there's a plan. That's when we start doing some calculations. So that image in the top corner, that's just a hand calculation that I'll have to do. There's hand calculations to do it, how big your foundations are going to have to be, but also how much load from the wind there's going to be on your building. And all of these calculations are done by different structural engineers. And as a young graduate, I do lots of mine by hand. I'm still learning. There's a lot of checking going on. And then as you get more experienced, people are able to do those calculations in 15 minutes or in less time. And then it kind of moves on to more of a modelling stage. So that blue structure that you can see is a model of just a one-storey steel frame building. And so it's been modelled after I've done the calculations about how thick my beams need to be and what sizes everything I think needs to be. And then I have it in this software, and there's a virtual load put on it that represents the actual load. And I can see the efficiency of all the builds, of all the segments, making sure everything's staying up. And if I think anything needs to change from that. And obviously that's all, again, being checked by my seniors. And then the other type of modelling I do is Revit modelling, BIM modelling, which is also another very collaborative process. So the building there is a 2-storey office building, and that's the structural model. But there'll actually be an architect doing their own model and an M&E person doing their own model. And together we can collaborate to make sure that they're all fitting in together, so that I haven't put a column right in the middle of where an architect wants its window to be. So you have to do all this communication, but that model ends up being these 2 drawings that we can see on either side. So a detailed drawing showing how an intricate detail is going to be constructed on site, to a more overall drawing. And these end up being basically the instructions for the the contractors on site. So another thing that I do that I've been working on quite recently is just on the next slide. So this is a bit what Annabel was talking about earlier. It's some work I've been doing recently about embodied carbon and life cycle assessment. So for those of you that don't know, embodied carbon and operational carbon come together to be the whole carbon, whole life cycle carbon. And we all tend to know a bit more about operational carbon. So that's the energy that we need to keep our house warm, to keep it ventilated, over the whole life of a project. So a whole life of a building, so 60 years, say. But the embodied carbon is actually the carbon that's inherent in a building before it's even been used. So that's how much energy it took to make all the concrete that went into the building. It's all the energy that it took to make the steel columns. It's also all the energy that it took to build it. So the energy that went into the diggers to do the extractions, the energy that that we had to use to get to site and things like that. So this embodied carbon is kind of critical to trying to reduce, to hit our targets of net zero in the future. And so what I've been doing related to this is using this new software that we've got called one-click LCA software. So basically it can be used to calculate this whole life carbon in a building for at any stage of the project. So say at that early design stage where we're trying to decide if we should build a 2-storey building out of concrete or steel, or what type of design we should use. We could put both of these different type of models into this, and I would be able to produce results and show you, yeah, we thought that steel would be better, but actually using concrete and using recycled concrete, we're able to actually have a way lower embodied carbon in this building. And so going forward, that can just impact the design decisions and impact what structural design ends up, the actual structural design ends up being. Later on in the process, I can get the Revit model that I've designed earlier and input that into the building to get it even exact. So I can, in this software, even put in the exact type of carpet we're going to lay, or the exact style of beam, more structural relevant. So you can be really specific, and there's a massive difference between, say, a certain type of steel that was produced in Denmark to the steel that's produced here in the UK. So that's all been able to take into account there, and it gives everyone awareness of how much carbon is emitted from what they do. Yeah, I learned this software, and I've been developing it and around it to make sure that it's a service that we're going to be able to provide to our clients. So that's about the workflow, and also the output and how we're going to display that, and what input do we need from clients and what input do we need from the design team to have a whole package of a service that we can provide. And this is something I'm really excited about. I think it's a great direction for the company to be going in, and I can't wait to continue to work on it and to continue to develop more and learn more about it myself. So yeah, this again leads on to my next slide, which is the spotlight of the industry. And like Annabel said, it's the decarbonisation of the construction industry. So as most of us hopefully know, that the UK has set a net zero target by 2050. And there's loads of different smaller plans within that about how we're going to reach that. And the overarching thing as well as the Paris Agreement. So lots of the focus up until now has been on the operational carbon, and we've made leaps and bounds over the past few years, making lots of our buildings far more efficient. And that makes the embodied carbon even more important, because as the operational carbon gets smaller and smaller in our structure, the embodied carbon is just going to be ever more significant. And we need to just be aware of that as not just engineers in the company, everyone in the construction industry has an impact. Whoever talks to clients, and together as an industry, we all have to come together and make these strides to become a more efficient and more sustainable industry. And that's a whole change of culture and mindset. And it's going to be difficult, but I think it's quite a good challenge to have going ahead. And I'm excited to work with people on it. So yeah, hopefully you've learned a bit from that. And if you have any questions, like you said, we can talk a bit about it at the end. And my details are here up on the screen. I'm probably the only Grainee Maguire-Conneely in the UK, so quite easy to find on LinkedIn or through my email. Thanks.
Fab. Well, thank you, Grainee. That's fab. I think, yes, you may be the one and only, so very, very easy to get in contact with. It was really interesting to hear what you get up to on a day-to-day basis, actually. Having had lunch with you so many times in the office, I still couldn't tell you what you do. But also what skills this involves. I think it's quite easy talking about projects, but actually, yeah, the different skills that come to do your role, I think is fantastic. And also great to hear about the strides your team are making in terms of ensuring future developments help to meet net zero targets. I think it's a really interesting part of the construction industry to be in. So whilst we've got you, it's your turn to answer the question of the webinar. So I hope you had a bit of a chance to think about it. What has been your favourite lockdown TV series so far?
So this was a difficult choice for me. And I think like lots of people, I had different shows per lockdown. So the first one was an easy choice. It was definitely The Last Dance. As a huge basketball fan, it was great to have that show coming out. The second lockdown, I watched an awful lot of the US Office, so that was very time consuming, happily. And recently I've been getting into the Formula One documentary on Netflix, and I've seemed to learn everything there is to know about Formula One in the past 2 months. So it's been a learning curve there as well, me, never stop learning.
The first two I could imagine you watching, the last not at all. That came as a surprise. But yeah, maybe a recommendation for people who don't think they like Formula One. Maybe that's the way to go. Well, yeah, thank you, Grainee. So we'll now pass on to Jack, who's going to tell us a bit about his role as a planning consultant at Atkins. So over to you, Jack.
Great, thanks Emily, and thanks to everyone at Tetra Tech for having me on. So yeah, my name's Jack Lorraine and I'm a planning consultant at Atkins. So we are located in Bristol, on the edge of Bristol at Asset West Business Park. So I became a chartered member of the RTPI in December 2020, and I have about 3.5 years experience now, which is scary thinking about it. And yeah, there's a picture of the team there during happier times anyway. So yeah, if you could go to the next slide, please. So just a bit of background about the company. Atkins is a multinational engineering and design consultancy. We employ about 18,000 people across Europe, Asia, the Middle East and North America. And in terms of planning, I think there's about 50 planners located in the UK at present. And we're located sort of Birmingham, Bristol, London and Warrington. So the company was founded as WS Atkins and Partners in 1938, and we were just branded simply as Atkins in 2002. And by 2016, we're the UK's largest engineering consultancy. We've since been acquired by Canadian construction firm S&C Lavalin in 2017, which was slightly prior to when I joined the company. So the key markets that we were involved in is cities and development, energy, environment, aerospace and defence, transportation and water. So the planning team sit within the infrastructure division of the company. So we tend to work on a lot of linear large-scale projects such as rail schemes and motorway junction improvements. And on top of that, we also get the opportunity to sort of work on a broad range of projects through sort of the preparation and coordination of the more traditional planning applications, as well as getting involved in EIA as well. So yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. So yeah, as mentioned previously, my job title is the planning consultant. I started in 2017 as a summer student, sort of whilst completing my master's dissertation. This then changed to a graduate planner in 2017, having been offered a full-time contract. So in terms of qualifications, I completed an undergraduate degree in human geography and a master's in urban planning, both at UE and Bristol. So with the geography degree, as you can imagine, it was a bit more broad, sort of allowed you to sort of decide on the specialism as you went through the course really. So that sort of just happened to be planning by the end of it. So sort of going on from the undergrad to the masters basically ensured, for me anyway, ensured that I had a sound base of knowledge acquired in order to achieve that specialism. So I'm not really sure I could have gone into the job I'm doing now purely off the back of my undergrad degree. I think it was important to get some transferable skills from the masters. Another good thing about the masters, I think Brad will probably tell you the same as well. We studied with a lot of part-time students who are already employed in the industry, so we could sort of learn a few things from them that we might not have been able to pick up from other people who were just sort of going through the university process off the bat. So yeah, I definitely found that the masters itself, in terms of the things we were learning and the people that we could learn from, gave us a good amount of could lead us into the workplace in terms of the work that we're asked to do. So yeah, in terms of the work that I'm doing in my role, as you can imagine, prepares planning submission docs and coordinating delivery of supporting documents which feed into planning applications. So as part of that, I liaise with local planning authorities and external stakeholders. But another key aspect of my work, which I've sort of grown into over the last couple of years, is assessing the potential impacts of projects on population and human health. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So the first project example I'm going to use is M5 Junction 10, which is located to the west of Cheltenham. It proposes to improve capacity for vehicle movements at the junction by creating an all movements junction and the dualling of the A4019. This project and a lot of others that I work on are based on the Highways of England framework, which is a key client for us, and we use guidance set out by the design manual for road and bridges. The rationale for the project is centred on the need to facilitate and safeguard future development in Chippenham, including 2 major housing sites in proximity to the junction. So the main aim of the scheme itself is to facilitate future development at a strategic level. However, the key consideration for the assessment I do is sort of on the immediate effect of the population in proximity to the scheme, both during construction and operation of the scheme. So the first thing we look to do when undertaking these assessments is to identify the baseline in terms of the receptors within the study area, which could be affected by the scheme. So primarily we use online mapping tools, address-based data if it's available, And also, I hear we actually can undertake site visits as well, but I've never been lucky enough to actually do that yet. But I think on this project, as it moves towards the ES stage, I think that'll be something that happens as well, which would be nice because to sort of see it firsthand. And with the baseline, what we look to do is effectively assign a level of sensitivity based on consideration, such as, well, you know, for businesses and things like properties, it's the size, it's the receptor size and the level of use. If it's a public right of way, it's the level of use and whether it's used for commuting or recreational uses. So the bar is sort of set from very high down to negligible in terms of how sensitive a receptor can be. The main focus is on basically, in terms of the assessment of those receptors, is on potential land take and severance as a result of the scheme. So these assessments will set out the magnitude of any potential impact on these receptors. So again, this goes from major down to no change. So the actual resultant effect is the product of the sensitivity of the receptors and the magnitude of impact. So it's sort of like a matrix, which would have been quite useful to actually show on here. But there we go. So just as an example, a receptor with a medium sensitivity to change could experience a minor magnitude of impact, which would result in a moderate adverse effect. In terms of this project specifically, you'll probably be able to sort of see from the picture there's a few residential houses, residential properties located sort of adjacent to the A4019. And the main aim of this scheme is to sort of turn it, as you can probably work out from there, it's not an all movements junction. You can only exit. You can only enter the junction if you want to head north, and you can only exit when you're heading south. So in order to create an all movements junction, it's looking like those residential properties will have to be demolished. These receptors are high in sensitivity due to their location to the scheme, and the magnitude of impact is major due to the demolition. So there's a significant adverse effect there in terms of population. If you go to the next slide, I'll talk about the human health aspects of the scheme. So this is more sort of community based in terms of identifying receptors. So the receptors sort of form groups of community clusters rather than sort of picking individual areas or individual paths like the population assessment. So for example, we'd be looking to identify hamlets or a neighbourhood in an urban area, students at a school or shoppers at a retail park. So just off the top there, you could see Elmstone Hardwick to the north of the site. That would be considered to be a community cluster, as they'll sort of experience similar effects as a whole, rather than sort of picking out individual aspects of that cluster. So sensitivity is identified via professional judgment. So again, use of Google Maps and other mapping and sort of aerial imagery. So just in terms of identifying sensitivity, it's, you know, considerations such as the community's severance from outdoor space and healthcare facilities and the existing transport network. Because the transport network's a key consideration, as, you know, sort of more vulnerable members of the community need sort of public transport access to hospitals and community centres and the like. So we're sort of just trying to work out how sensitive a certain community may be. Another way of ascertaining sensitivity is through the use of demographic data and health-focused census data. So through that, we can work out the proportion of the population which already experiences health issues and how much of the population might need sort of priority access to healthcare facilities. And then we also use our other environmental topic chapters such as air quality, noise, landscape, amenity, and the transport chapters, just to gain sort of, it's almost like a cumulative assessment of all the assessments, bringing everything together to work out, just getting a clear picture of how unhealthy or healthy a community might be. So the assessment focus, we sort of group once we sort of gain a picture of all the considerations, we sort of group them together into three main considerations, which are general amenity, physical health, and access to open space and healthcare facilities. So we take each community cluster and receptor and assess them against those considerations. So the main thing we're looking to do is sort of just it's especially for the access part of the assessment, is to assess people's movements during construction, in terms of, for example, on this example here, movements on the A4019 are going to be limited due to the extensive construction work. So if you look to the south there, and to the smaller roads to the north, though, it's the extent to which these residents of those villages and hamlets might experience decreased health due to increased vehicle emissions, dust deposition, and the like. So once we sort of build up that picture, we sort of come to a conclusion of whether there'll be a positive, neutral, or negative health impact on these community clusters, and then sort of set it out in the assessment accordingly. So just to sort of conclude on the population and human health assessments, at the early stage of the EIA process, we're sort of looking, most of these assessments are looking to differentiate between route options to try and work out the option which will be most preferable for population and human health. Going towards the ES stage, when we have our preferred route option, which we now do for this scheme, as you can see there, we're looking to just assess it as is, in terms of the scheme and the actual effects that the scheme will have on population and human health of Cheltenham and the sort of the communities in and around the scheme. If you'd like to go to the next slide, please. I thought I'd just include a little application that I've been involved in. This is sort of maybe 2 years ago now, but it was a bit of a baptism of fire, really. There was quite so just as a bit of background to it, it was for the relocation of an indoor bowls facility to an outdoor facility. So it's effectively an amalgamation of one facility into another. There was a number of considerations that made it a difficult one to manage, especially as sort of a new graduate planner who was sort of being told to go and run with it. So as you might be able to sort of work out from the image, but the site is landlocked. They were looking to develop the indoor bowling facility on an allotment site to the east of the existing site there. So there was plenty of community opposition to that and local policy standards to adhere to as well. I was actually told before I started that the landscape architects went on to do a bit of survey work, and they were chased off by a few of the locals. So that sort of set the tone really in terms of what we were getting in terms of opposition. But yeah, some more considerations that made it a difficult one. Really, it was the access to the south of the site that you can probably see there. It's already inadequate, really, especially in terms of emergency vehicle access. So we had to do a lot of consultation with the local fire service in terms of how would they access and egress the site in terms of if there was an issue for them. Parking is already at capacity as well. How can we justify having increased levels of cars not only within the site but within the surrounding streets as well in terms of overflow? There was noise concerns as well in terms of sort of people leaving later than what they would if there was only an outdoor facility. And properties right to light as well. Those properties to the east of the site there was concerns at the introduction of a sort of quite prominent building and what effect that might have on their right to light. Just go into a bit more detail in terms of my role within it. I was asked to do a sequential site assessment to prove that there were no sites which were considered to be more suitable by the local authority. So this developed my understanding of the economic considerations to be taken into account in a planning application. I was given some other sites to assess by the local authority, and I came to the conclusion none of the other sites were commercially available for purchase or lease, so they could not be sequentially preferable sites. As I've already mentioned, in terms of the extensive community opposition, the large number of objections resulted in the application being decided at committee. So obviously that involved me coming along to committee and providing the planning input. The interesting thing for me was the scheme was recommended for approval by both the planning and the highways officers at the local authority. However, the committee deferred the decision to allow the officers to further determine the suitability of the site. I was quite surprised by this, and it raised the question of the power of professional opinion versus the elected officials. This is because whilst the planning and highways officers recommended approval, the committee members were close to refusing the application. And at the time, I was of the opinion that the intense opposition from the residents within the committee contributed to the application being deferred. But on my way home, I sort of tried to reconsider, and I sort of considered the fact that the committee members may have had a desire to be reflective of the community which they serve, which in itself is an important aspect of the planning process, in my opinion. So that's sort of two kind of the two sides of work that I'm mostly involved in. But if we go to the next slide, I've got sort of a few thoughts on the planning white paper and sort of what it means not only for what I'm doing in my role, but just sort of more widely in terms of the planning profession as a whole, really. So I'm sure as I guess the planners on the call will be aware that this went out for consultation in August 2020. We proposed a number of reforms in the planning system. So yeah, I've got some key areas to consider, and I'll just offer a few thoughts on what on the implications and what we do, really. So like the first aspect key for me is the digitisation of the planning sector. So for the work we do at Atkins, I think that this should lead to quicker access to data, better informed decision making, and will help to better engage stakeholders in the planning process, which is something I'm just sort of being exposed to a bit more in terms of working with the comms teams, in terms of sort of making sure we're engaging with the right people early and sort of making sure that everyone's involved, so we're not there's no curveballs being thrown later down the line in the application process. Another key aspect is the simplification of land use plans with the zoning style approach, so the growth, renewal and protection areas. So I think limiting automatic permission in principle to growth areas could help to ensure flexibility within local plans by allowing development on land outside these areas to be determined by local authorities. However, having one set of national development management policies for growth areas and another set of local policies for non-growth areas could be complicated and result in inconsistencies in decision making. The proposals for protective area seem fairly reasonable in my opinion. However, there will be some land within this designation that would be available to accommodate development. So I think it's just it's important not to lose the ability to differentiate on a local level. That should not be lost in favour of a more streamlined and simplified system, I think. And finally, the community infrastructure levy reform. The white paper proposed to charge it as a fixed proportion of the development value above a threshold, with mandatory nationally set rate and the current system of planning obligations being abolished. With this, I just think there's a risk that a nationally set rate or nationally set area specific rate will be unresponsive to local market context and changing local market conditions in different places over time. This is especially significant issue for larger and long-term development, much like the majority of the work we do at Atkins. So if you go to the next slide, that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of what I do in terms of planning and population and human health. My contact details are there if you want to find out more about it. But yeah, the main thing is thank you very much for having me on. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Jack. That was a really interesting presentation. Particularly good to hear about the population and human health assessments you undertake, which sounds like a niche area of planning that you've managed to find. It's good to know that down the line, as our careers all progress, that there are avenues for planners to specialise in. But right, not last but least, it's your turn to answer the question of the webinar. So Jack, what's been your favourite lockdown TV series?
Yeah, I'd say for me it was The American Office. I'd never watched it before, and then I got introduced to it by my housemate, and it sort of turned into a bit of a marathon of the US Office every day after work. So that kept me busy for quite a while. Every time I thought we were finished, there was another season that would pop up. So
there are tons of episodes, and another good one for lunchtimes as well. They're nice and short.
Yeah, exactly. But other than that, there's not really much. I'm sort of at a bit of a crossroads with TV series at the minute. I haven't really sort of got anything good to watch at the minute. So yeah, if anyone has any TV series, send them my way, because I'm sort of in a bit of a rut at the minute, I think.
Well, you've had plenty of recommendations from the rest of us, so
exactly.
Gotta write them all down and go through them, see who you agree with. Well, thank you all three of you for your presentations. That was really, really great. We'll now move on to the question and answer session. So if anybody has a question for our guest speakers, please feel free, put your hand up, turn your camera on, or pop it in the chat box, and we'll aim to get through as many as possible. I don't know does anybody know whether there are any in the chat function? shout? No.
We've got a couple of questions from Jack Clark-Williams.
That would be fantastic. Shall we start with that?
Annabel and for Grainee. So,
that sounds good.
The first one for Annabel that Jack asks, what do you prefer, taking a site with outline consent or starting with a fresh site?
Oh, good question. I'd say that personally, I probably prefer taking a fresh site because there's more opportunity for planning influence. I'd say I quite enjoy sort of writing representations and sort of devising a broader strategy for what we might do. But that's kind of that is a very personal feeling, and it also does change from time to time depending on my workload, because sometimes if you've got a lot of to think about when you're writing representations and they're quite time consuming, it's nicer to have those sort of more immediate prospects. I'd say the good thing about outlines that I do enjoy on the other side sort of thing is if they are relatively broad, sometimes they don't have a layout sort of attached to the outline permission. And then really it's kind of the best of both worlds. If you've got the principle sort of already agreed with the authority and the number of units set, so that gives me the parameters. But then in terms of design and working that through and what makes good planning in terms of the place that you're going to live in, and then you've still got that scope to work within, and I quite enjoy that. So I'd say the sort of more open outlines are quite enjoyable as a nice day-to-day, but I really do like writing representations for the strategic sites.
Fantastic. No, that's really good. And then Jack's question for Grainee was relating to the controversy over this coal mine in Cumbria, whether you've got any opinions on how that would affect sort of providing material for British steel, reducing the need for imports, or how much embodied carbon does it take sourcing steel from the UK rather than sort of elsewhere?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because like we do take account of transportation, like I was saying, and so it's like trying to find the fine line. But lots of the steel that we get from Europe, it's the best steel because of the way it's produced. So this like new place opening in the UK, even though we'd only have to transport it a short distance, it's not transporting as much. It's still getting produced by coal, which is what is kind of changing in the industry. Like there's places and manufacture. I'm not like the expert in this, but from what I've read, lots of the methods of producing steel have become greener. And so what's the point in opening somewhere that's still producing it another way, the older way? So even at the moment, like if I'm doing the calculations, that the steel coming from Denmark, say, or from Germany is much better than any steel that you can get in the UK just because of how they're producing it. So the best case scenario is if British could start producing steel in a more greener way, rather than sticking the way that we've made it in the past, revolutionizing that and making that a greener way. That makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. It's an area that I just know nothing about, so it's really interesting to sort of hear about the engineering side of things. So yeah. Thank you. Has anyone else got any questions at all?
I've got a question, if that's okay. I'll jump in for everyone else. So what's been the best advice you've been given in your career to date? And we'll start with you, Grainee.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I suppose I've been given quite a lot of good advice. The like never stop learning thing that I've kind of preached a bit that. I love that advice. Like you always like are developing if you're learning, even if it's out with of your exact field. I think that's always going to be beneficial to you. Like me learning about planning, like today, that's going to be beneficial to me, you know. So I think that's probably some of the best advice I've been given. Never stop learning.
That sounds like great advice. How about yourself, Jack?
I think it was quite early on actually. I was sort of having a conversation with basically the guy who started a year before me, and he sort of said, try and work out, because we obviously, you do plenty of work for different sort of senior planners and principal planners, and just try and work out how they like things done, and sort of rather than just sort of letting it go over your head, to actually consciously sort of take it down and sort of work out how they like things done, and so you can just get things right first time more often. And yeah, so I've tried to do that as much as possible, really. Just sort of, obviously you have your own way of doing things and you have a baseline for making it right, but there's little tweaks here and there that you can sort of implement to make them happy, which is always good.
That's good advice. And how about you, Annabel?
Mine's probably more like career generally advice that I was given, which was, I guess, about not comparing yourself. And I think there's a tendency when you are on a path which quite a few people have taken, of having a geography degree, going into planning and sort of working your way to chartership, and then it's a bit like, what next at this point? And I think it's easy to go, well, that person is going for, a principal planner job. They're doing that by age whatever, or by whatever amount of years experience. But actually, even from organisation to organisation of just house building, there's different job titles mean different things and different responsibility. But then when you start to look at going to, local authority or back to consultancy, or all different kinds of realms of working, particularly in planning, the job senior planner means a different thing at all different places. And so actually, not only is comparing yourself not a good thing, particularly mentally anyway, it actually isn't always particularly a fair comparison. What you do in one role as a senior planner can be different to what someone else does. But equally, the piece of advice is don't undersell yourself. When you are looking to make the next steps and things, don't diminish what experience you have had or what skills you have, and don't measure yourself necessarily by your year's experience, but actually by what the quality of your experience is. And they sort of tie in together, I'd say.
That's a really good answer, actually. Yeah, very, very true. Is there any advice from any of the audience, if you'd like to share anything? We've all gone quiet. I put you all on the spot, so I'll let you off.
Well, if nobody wants to add, I've got a question for everyone. The kind of opposite to that, I guess, is, what is the worst advice you've ever been given in your career so far? Jack, do you want to go first?
It's a difficult one, really. I wouldn't want to call anyone out. It's
you don't have to name names.
Yeah, I don't know. It's more just from a friend. I remember a friend trying to tell me to sort of almost usurp my line manager and just sort of almost, just try and gain the recognition of people above him. And I was just sort of thought, well, first and foremost, I need to sort of be working as a team with my team, and sort of keeping my line manager happy and keeping the rest of my team happy. I don't want to start sort of rocking the boat and sort of hunting down people that are sort of above and beyond what I need to be doing, especially as someone who's recently come into the industry. So off the top of my head, I'd probably say that. But I haven't had too much bad advice, I wouldn't have thought.
That's good. Yeah, so much of it comes down to working as a team. You may disagree with somebody's opinion, but essentially, the team is where it's at. So I completely agree with that one. What about you, Grainee?
Yeah, well, I was at university. I was told time and time again that I'd never get a job if I didn't do an internship. And I thought that was awful advice, because, first of all, not everyone was in an opportunity to be able to go and do an internship. If you have to have a part-time job, I part-time worked for most of my degree, and I wasn't going to drop that part-time job and then potentially not be able to get one back just to have an internship in the summer. So I thought, and it's not just about work experience in that specific role. You get so much experience from what you're doing at university, or even very much out with that. And so I remember almost not getting an internship just to prove this person wrong, that one of my lecturers, I was like, what's the point? If I thought just that was very narrow-minded, basically, and I was a bit I'll just challenge it. So yeah, I think that's probably it.
That's a great advice starting out, and I have to say, having having listened to all the people we've had on Networkish going forwards, I think what really shines out is the fact that you can come to the construction industry from so many different angles, and it's not the traditional kind of, especially with planning, you don't have to do a geography degree. Like, it's just these traditional routes that a lot of people do, but there's so much option out there.
Because they are beneficial. Like, I can get that internships are great and stuff, and people perfect, but I just thought it was just a bit unfair of like you have to get one or you'll never get a job. That type of advice I can never back up. So.
Yeah, no, that's fab. What about you, Annabel?
There's a couple of things that spring to mind, and one is just about sort of the way that you contact people to get a job or an internship, and people saying that actually the direct approach won't work, that you have to go through HR and you have to go through that process. And for me, that's not how it worked. I made a phone call and had a conversation with someone to get my first job, and then followed up with a direct email. And I think sometimes that confidence and connection and being able to talk it out can be quite nice. That said, I'm sure lots of people are very successful through, mainstream routes. But I think if you broaden your search, through that is quite valuable. But also, the kind of worst advice I'd say is about, just put that in the too hard box or too hard basket. And save it for another day when something particularly challenging has come across my desk. And it's like, well, actually, that's not going to help anyone, because we're going to have to deal with it at some point. And actually tackling something head on and making a start on that straight away sort of thing gives you the more time and consideration to be able to deal with something that's quite hard. And really, it's not going to help either your client or your team to sort of procrastinate, really. And I'm sure everyone's guilty of procrastinating, and it's fine sometimes on the little things, but when it comes to something that's quite difficult, I think really getting your teeth sunk into it is more valuable.
Yeah, I agree. There's quite often there's a tendency to shy away from the difficult projects, but actually they turn out to be the most interesting and exciting, and the ones that we actually learn the most on. So yeah, I completely agree. It may feel uncomfortable at the beginning, but the more you learn, the more comfortable it gets. So I think we've hit about an hour now. John, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, I think we've run over slightly, but thank you all for bearing with us at the start. I think we can all agree that the presentations from Annabel, Grainee and Jack were really good. I mean, I personally have learned quite a lot. There's so much that I haven't sort of even touched within my career, and it's just really, really interesting to hear from you guys and sort of hear from your experiences. And if anyone does have any other questions at all that may come to you after we finish, then we will circulate our details. We'll also circulate a list of attendees, probably be tomorrow morning, but obviously feel free to get in touch. Looking forward, we will be running our next session in May time, so keep an eye out for the announcement there. Hopefully we'll obviously be a little bit less locked down as well. We'll be able to get out and do some stuff. We're always looking for speakers, people who want to practice their presentation skills. So if you fancy it, obviously get in touch. But otherwise, all that remains for us to say is massive thank you again for coming along. Thank you to our speakers, and we hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.